Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Joe Bergamini coming to you once again for the Sabian Education Network. This is a day I've been waiting for. I'm very, very excited. We've had some wonderful guests, and as I said in my Facebook post, I've had the privilege of interviewing many of my heroes here for the Sabian Education Network. And today's one of those days. We have one of the legends of drumming, and I didn't have to do any research for this, Rod. So if I miss anything or leave anything out, just correct me. So burst onto the scene with the Dixie Dregs in the 70s after graduating from the University of Miami, became an award-winning, globally known proponent of progressive rock and fusion drumming, winning Modern Drummer Awards left and right, toured all over the world with Dixie Dregs. Then when Steve Morse formed his band, went with Steve Morse. I wore out the introduction, trying to play along with Cruise Missile and many of the other tracks. Killer double bass shuffle. It's in my little course I made for double bass. So Steve Morse band. And then, of course, during the 80s was all over MTV and became a huge international rock star with Winger and played on a bunch of wonderful records with them and still an active member of Winger. Just did a cool video with Kip with a lot of celebrities singing, which we'll talk about. And so Rod's been a legend on the playing circuit, and of course played some amazing music with the Rod Morgenstein project, playing very difficult progressive rock music. And also his pedigree as an educator. He's been a teacher, a professor at the Berklee College of Music, teaching rock curriculum. So that's relevant to the education discussion today. And is also the author of a couple of books, but I have here The Drum Set Musician, and I've been informed the older cover version of Drum Set Warm-Ups. So we have tons to talk about, and I'm thrilled you took an hour, which won't be enough. Welcome, Rod Morgenstein.
So great to be here, Joe. Wonderful to see you and hang with you.
Was that okay? No, that was off the cuff, by the way.
That's pretty good. I mean, if there's time, we could talk about some of the other, groups of musicians and bands that I've done recordings and touring with, like Jordan Rudess with my duo, the keyboard player from Dream Theater, and then the Jelly Jam with John Myung, bass player from Dream Theater, and Ty Tabor, the guitarist and vocalist with King's X, and then Jazz is Dead, which is one of the most fun things I've ever done in my life, because in the jam band scene, anything goes. And the concept behind jam band music is whatever you did yesterday in that concert, you don't want to do it today in this concert. And so it's all about taking chances, which sometimes ends up you fall on your face, but you pick yourself up and then you just go for it. And magical things happen when you take chances.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great place to start. So you that in that situation, I mean, I know you've written about this and talked about it in Modern Drummer interviews and things, but when you were doing something like Winger, I'm sure in the Dregs, the avenues for improvisation were pretty wide open. But would you say you were always a very improvisational player through all those years, or is that something you sort of somewhat prepared, somewhat improvisational?
Most of the bands, with the exception of Jazz is Dead, are more controlled environments with jamming to a degree, right? So even in the Dixie Dregs, even though, it was like this fusion jazz rock sound and approach, most of what you're hearing in the drumming are, patterns that I spend a lot of time to try to work out and come up with something that is suitable for all of the other music that's going on around me, with limited opening spots to kind of change things from night to night. But, to me, the greatest thing a drummer can do is come up with like a signature drum groove that can stand on its own. And so someone doesn't even have to hear the melody or the riff or the chord changes going on. They just hear the groove around. They go, oh my God, that's Steve Gadd, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, that kind of thing. And so I've always, made an effort in all the different bands that I play in, to try to the best of my ability to come up with patterns that can stand on their own. So like in the Dixie Dregs, there's a song called Assembly Line, and another song, Divided We Stand. And so I don't play those songs radically differently from show to show. It's like, no, 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 this groove is an integral part of the song, just as the melody and riffs are.
Right.
But in Jazz is Dead, the approach is more like jazz musicians or jazz fusion musicians seeing how far they can take this Grateful Dead music and create something new from night to night. So that's the long answer. The short answer is, in every band, I'm doing like a controlled bit of certain things that will be the same each time the song is played, with taking things in different directions in addition to it. But in the jam band arena, it's like, if you feel like putting the sticks down and just playing with your feet for a couple of minutes, the band members aren't, the other guys in the band aren't going to turn and look at you like you're out of your mind. They're just going to turn and go, "Hey, cool, man, that's great." Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's something like Rod Morgenstein project where you're playing with Jordan and you're playing very involved music, I guess it seems like the more progressive rock music, I mean, is more apt to have the kind of arrangement thing where it's like, oh, this chorus is 8 bars shorter, and then there's a different bridge here, so it doesn't allow you to stretch out as much just from the way the music's constructed. I'm assuming in Jazz is Dead, those are open sections where like you're going until some soloist is going until they're done, and then they're going to let everybody know they're done, and then the next thing happens, right?
Totally right. So when I play with Jordan, it's almost like an orchestral approach.
Right.
Certain sections will open up. I mean, because he's such an amazing improvisational artist. There's nobody on the planet like him. But so much of what we do are these, songs that are conceived with specific melodies and rhythms, and you play them the same way from show to show.
And did you? I may be making this up, but I remember reading a Modern Drummer story or something with you, where you talked about having to change your playing, or maybe not scale it back, but just play less notes, I guess you'd say, with Winger in bigger venues and things like that. Am I making that up, or is that something you went through?
Oh, no. Here's the thing. There's a reason why various styles of music sound the way they do. And it's because each style of music, or each genre within the genre, have specific ingredients that make it sound unique. So you can't play Back in Black with AC/DC and take a Neil Peart Rush approach. It will completely change the music. Now, there might be those prog drummer or prog music fans that go, "Oh, I love that, that drumming that sounds so different in Back in Black." But I think most lovers of AC/DC are going to want to obliterate that drummer. And so, when I auditioned for Winger, I had moved to New York City from Atlanta, Georgia, where my wife, Michelle, and I were living. And I didn't know what the next thing was going to be. But having, from the day I had graduated from college at the University of Miami in Florida, from that day for about 8 or 10 years or 11 years, it was right into the Dixie Dregs and Steve Morse band, instrumental, whatever you want to call this conglomeration of fusion, jazz, rock, classical, bluegrass, folk. It was kind of its own thing. So when I moved to New York to look for the next thing, the last thing I wanted to do was to continue on that path. I grew up as a teenager into Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, Jimi Hendrix, Cream. That was my world. And so I was hoping to get back to my roots. The problem was I had become a bit of a fusion jazz snob in my years in college, and then in those years in the Dixie Dregs, being in a musician environment. So, you sometimes would tend to look down your nose at the straight ahead rock player, thinking that they're very limited in terms of what they can do and their knowledge of what's going on, instead of realizing, oh, this is why AC/DC sounds like AC/DC. That's how you have to approach it. And you can't do it with disrespect. You have to do it with respect. So when I first moved to New York, there were lots of musicians that would invite me to jam sessions. And they initially were excited because most of them were fans of the Dixie Dregs and knew who I was. But they were more rock-oriented players. And so someone would start with a dum, 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 dum. So I'd kind of power it with, you know, what I call kick snare pattern number 1, kick snare, and I'd hold that down for a measure or two, and then I would just start creeping into, you know, trying to lose everybody. Let's not hit the downbeat, you know, let's turn the beat around and play it backwards and put the kick on the end of 1 and the snare on the end of 2, and then start playing patterns of 5s and 7s and 9s. And for a little bit, the musicians would be into it, but then I'd never go back to, you know, the kick, snare, because I thought it was so stupid. because I was very immature, even though I was a guy in my 30s at the time. And so eventually someone took me aside, a friend of mine who I played in a German band called Zeno with in 1986. And he tried to explain to me how clueless I was. And unless I begin to have respect for the simpler ways of playing drums in rock music, I'm going to have a tough time being accepted into that world. And at first I thought he was, you know, kind of like, you know, a jerk. Like, what do you know? I come from this really cool band and this fusion world. And like, I initially didn't think he had any ground to stand on, but the more I thought about it, things started to make sense. And so when this set of circumstances led to me ultimately auditioning for Winger, I walked in to the rehearsal facility in New York City, and I left my fusion chops in the hall. And when Kip Winger walked up to me with his bass and started pumping eighth notes, all I played was kick, snare, sloshy quarter notes on the hi-hat, and I didn't do anything else, thinking that's what he wants to hear. So he stops me after about 30 seconds or a minute, and he says, like, what are you doing? I said, you're pumping eighth notes on the bass. I'm playing what I think is the appropriate thing to play. And he went, yeah. Sounds great. You're hitting hard. It's locked in. But Reb Beach, the guitarist, he's like this major. He said, I don't know who the Dixie Dregs are or who Steve Morse is, but Reb is your biggest fan. And he said, you can do the craziest stuff. I said, well, that's the world I come from, but I don't want to like kind of scare you away because I really want to play with you. And he said, no, I see that you're hitting the drums hard and you have respect for the simple stuff, but now lose me.
Wow.
I said, you're kidding me. Why do you want me to do that? And he said, we're trying to make it. This is 1987. And he said, look at the Billboard charts. Look at the 20 bands that are occupying those first 20 spots in the top 200 albums, right? Kiss, Michael Jackson, Def Leppard, Cinderella, Poison, then a pop, maybe Madonna, then another metal band. He said, we're trying to be lumped in with Kiss and Cinderella and Poison and Def Leppard, but wouldn't it be cool if Winger can have elements in our music that none of those bands have? And so maybe having a drummer that's come from this fusion jazz rock world or prog world, whatever you want to call it, maybe having someone like you in our band will enable us at certain times, not most of the time, but certain times in the music, when I give you the go ahead, like you show them things that no one has ever heard in the rock world. And I went, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in this situation. This is fantastic. And sure enough, when we recorded the first record, when we cut the music for 17, after the guitar solo, Kip and the producer said to me, Rod, it was a good take, but can you maybe think about doing something in these 2 measures when we just go back to the riff? I said, I have a great idea. You're probably going to hate it, but here it goes. And so, do you know what I'm talking about? So I turned the beat around.
Yep.
And it was, groove displacement 101. I'm not talking about, when Vinnie Colaiuta or Dave Weckl or Simon Phillips or you or whoever really turns things around. But so I kind of went, so I started hitting the kick on the anza 1, snare on the anza 2, and they loved it. That's what made it to the record. There it was on the video that was one of the most played videos in the fall of 1988 into 89. And I can't tell you how many hundreds and hundreds of the musicians that would come to these heavy metal shows would ask me what is going on in those couple of measures after Reb's guitar solo. What time signature is that? Why does it seem like the bottom dropped out? Why did the music go upside down? What's going on? And I was so flattered that so many people were picking up on the fact that something unusual was happening. So I'd start rattling off the list of like the fusion contemporaries of mine, like Simon Phillips, Steve Smith, Dave Weckl, Vinnie Colaiuta, and not one of these musicians ever heard of any of them.
Those guys, yeah.
Yeah. Who are those guys?
Yeah.
So that was also an eye opener for me because they didn't know who I was either.
Right.
Until I was in Winger.
Right. That's such a cool thing though, because you probably remember even as a kid, and I certainly remember going to see certain bands and you learn as you go along. It's great that you mentioned Simon and Weckl and Vinny and all these guys. They're going to go back and go, oh my God, Rod, the drummer in Winger, knows those guys. I should check them out. But I could remember like going to see certain bands. I don't even know who I remember I went to see a band called Hurricane or something, and they were, I don't know who the drum, but I remember specifically seeing that band. It was like the Capitol Theater in Passaic. I was in my Rush phase, and I'm like, sometimes you watch a drummer and you're like, this guy's good. Like there's a lot behind the curtain here. Like he's like, you could just tell when a guy's like grooving, but there's a lot there. And I think it's interesting that you said that about Kip, because Kip's a great musician. He can do a lot of other things. So here you are thinking he's going to be like, yeah, great. Just play simple. You get it. And he's saying, bring this other stuff to it. But yet if you were still in this headspace of looking down your nose at the rock stuff, maybe it still wouldn't have gone that well. I mean, so it's probably still good that you approached it that way, right? I mean, I guess.
Absolutely. I would not have been asked to join the band had I been in that head that I was in not even 3 weeks earlier. Mm-hmm. Truly, for like a 10-year period, I didn't listen to rock. I couldn't understand, why would somebody use the same chord progression that I've heard 1,000 times before? Or why would anybody write a song that I can figure out as I'm hearing it? I mean, I'm a schooled musician. I'm a piano player. Actually, at the University of Miami, my main instrument was jazz piano because I wasn't so sure that I wanted to go the drum direction or piano direction. And so here I was, learning about sharp 11s and flat 13s and, ninths and all this kind of stuff. And to me, trying to continually increase your scope of knowledge of music because it's vast, that was the path I was on. Not like, okay, here we go, do 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 do. And it's like, didn't I hear that in Louie Louie when I was 12 years old? Why am I hearing it in a dozen songs 30 years later? Right. Why? And well, the why is because certain things work, and in popular culture, you don't use sharp 11s and flat 13s and sharp 9s. That's a different world. Right. If you want to reach the masses, people who just love beautiful, simple songs that are telling stories that they can relate to. It's not anything about the fusion snob thinking that I was locked into for so long.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I didn't know that about the piano thing, but that I mean, we could easily. There's so much more I want to talk about. We could spend the rest of this hour talking about this stuff, but that whole thing of like, there's all this technique and knowledge that you had, but at the end of the day, the music, and this is one of the things I've loved about your body of work, you know, going from Winger, and even with the Dregs, like it was always melodic and it never felt like it existed to lose people. Like, and it had those elements. I always wondered, you know, were you guys into country and bluegrass? Because that stuff is so ingrained in it, and it's just, the music is like, it's there for people for their life to. So it doesn't. It's not better or worse because it's simple, and that's the thing that like we lose sometimes, you know.
Right. You know, there was a general consensus in the Dixie Dregs early on, before we even got our first record deal, that musician music, instrumental fusion, jazz rock music, can sometimes tend to be a little self-indulgent, where it's more about the musicians doing their thing and a lack of interest or concern for the audience that they're playing it for. Mm-hmm. And so Steve Morse, who was, you know, the songwriter of this beautiful music, was always concerned with not just, you know, the intense, serious musician enjoying our music, but also for the casual music listener to have something to be able to sink their teeth into, even though they're not aware of all the crazy stuff going on underneath it. So that's why so much of the music is melodic. A lot of it is sing-songy, and not everything is in a crazy time signature or changing time signatures. And we took the approach of trying to be the most diverse sounding band in terms of how many different styles of music we would touch on. Now, in the end, it worked to our advantage, but in the beginning, trying to convince record labels that they should sign us, they found it very difficult, because so they'd hear us play like a rock-oriented song, but then it's followed by some classical sounding thing, then followed by a crazy up-tempo country thing, and then into something else. And they'd say, no record store will even know where to file your record. Should it be in the jazz section, the rock section, the classical section? And we said, who cares about that? This is like one of a kind. Don't you understand? Don't you see our vision? And it was door closed, slam, slam, slam. Steve Morse, Andy West, the bass player, and I took our demo album that we had recorded at the newly built Gusman Hall down at the university with a 24-track state-of-the-art studio. We were the first people to record in it. We did an album called The Great Spectacular that we used to hopefully get a record deal. We knocked on every label that we could get an address of in New York City unannounced, dropped off the record. 2 record labels were nice enough to let us sit down with an A&R person. CTI, that was that like jazz label, that had Diodato doing more of the newer groove-oriented jazz, not swing jazz, and Chrysalis Records. Everyone else said, just leave your record here, right? And about a month later, we had rejection letters from all 30 some odd labels saying, you know, like everything from, are you out of your mind? This is the age of disco, because it was 1976 or 75, 76. You can't dance to your music. It goes from one thing to the next. There's no continuity in it. There's no singing. Like, what are you thinking?
Right.
And so the initial reaction was maybe a little sadness, because we thought everybody was going to embrace us and want us, and it was the complete antithesis of that. But it made our fight to the finish all the more strong. It's like, you know what? We're going to prove the world wrong, or we're going to prove these record labels wrong. Now, that kind of leads, you know, to the discussion of, how do you make it, right? Like, how do you go from being outside the business to the inner circle where, oh my God, I can't believe I have a career as a musician. I make records, people buy them. I play gigs, people show up, I actually get a paycheck. How does that happen? Well, you have to have a modicum of talent. You don't have to be extremely, I don't believe you have to be like a monster by any stretch of the imagination. But what you do need to have happen along the way is a door open at a time where you're not necessarily expecting anything to happen. The lucky break. And the only way to make a lucky break happen is if you're prepared for the moment, if and when it does. So luck favors the prepared, is the saying. And so we got out of college, we had our record. We also used the record to get gigs in like the southern states. So we were living in and around Augusta, Georgia. So we tried to find out where there are clubs in the Carolinas, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida. And we got on a circuit where back then in the mid 70s, sight unseen, based on our record, a club owner would actually pay us $100 to drive the 1, 2, 3, 4, 500 miles, which, you know, we were complaining about then. Now, when I hear the stories from young people that are trying to play gigs and it's pay to play, here's 50 tickets, sell them for $10, give me the $500 and I'll let you play. It's horrible. So $100 was like a gold mine back then. Gas was under 30 cents a gallon, and a Motel 6 was about $15. So one or two guys would go in to get the hotel room. Everyone's hiding behind the building, and then you know,
20 guys pile in the room.
Yes, but the $100 paid for the gas, the hotel room, and McDonald's money. You know, but so we get on the circuit. You play a show. 4 people show up to see a band they never heard of. They think they're coming to see a country band because it's called the Dixie Dregs. 3 of them leave after the first song because it's not. But there's one fanatical fan for life who, when we come back 3 months later, drags their 20 best friends. And now we start this little groundswell. So one such evening, playing a club in Nashville called the Exit Inn, where a lot of country acts play, but they also would bring in rock bands. We were opening up for, I forget her, maybe Al Cooper put a band together. Al Cooper from the Blues Project and the original Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Here we are. So we're the opening act. We're playing, and all of a sudden we notice Chuck Leavell, the piano player from the Allman Brothers, sitting at the bar with someone who we didn't know. The Allman Brothers in the mid 70s were huge. We kick it into high gear. We finish our set. Chuck and the person he was with, whose name was Twigs Linden, who was their production manager, the Allman Brothers, they just happened to be in town with a night off, thought they'd come to the Exit Inn to see some country music, and are blown away by this instrumental musician band because Chuck Leavell was a serious musician. And they said, "Who the hell are you guys? What label are you on? Where can we buy your records?" We said, "We don't have a record deal. We need one." He said, "Oh, you've got a record deal now. First thing in the morning, we are calling Phil Walden, who's the president of Capricorn Records, which is the big Southern record label that the Allman Brothers are on, and the Marshall Tucker Band and Wet Willie, all the Southern bands." He said, "We're going to set up a playing date for you guys in Macon, Georgia, you know, the home of the label. Phil, he's going to sign you. You watch." And to his word, to both of their words, a month later, we played Macon, Georgia. Phil Walden brought all his VPs and everyone from the label that Chuck Leavell was raving about. And he shook our hand and said, "Boys, you got yourselves a deal." And that's what got the ball rolling for my career. Now, I could take it a step back and say, yeah, but how do you get in the Dixie Dregs, right? We met as students at a music college, or the music division of the University of Miami. I was playing jazz piano in an improvisational class, but I was admiring one guitarist out of 15 guys. He was the only guitarist that didn't play a big, fat, hollow body Gibson guitar with all the treble, playing these jazz patterns for jazz in the Jerry Coker Patterns for Jazz book. It was Steve Morse, you know, playing a beat up Fender Telecaster with 4 pickups and a Stratocaster neck with Gibson frets, long blonde hair. The teacher was always yelling at him because he didn't sound like a jazz guitarist. He sounded like Steve Morse. And one day, Steve Morse comes up to me and said, I know you as a piano player. Someone told me you play the drums. Can you fill in for my drummer who's a surfer and just broke his arm surfing? I said, sure. But I didn't know what I was walking into. It was the Dixie Dregs.
Wow.
I'm filling in, and they're playing Mahavishnu Orchestra cover tunes, Peaches and Regalia by Frank Zappa, and Steve Morse's originals that sound like Mahavishnu. And there's an electric violinist, Alan Sloan. It's the same lineup of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which at the time was my favorite band.
Right.
I knew every note that Billy Cobham played on those first two records because I wore out the grooves. And so, you know, I think someone should write a book. Maybe we could do this. You interview 100 musicians that have a career on some level of career that is on the inside where they make a living doing only music. And in a few words or a few pages, let each of these musicians, doesn't have to be drummers, tell their story of how their career happened for them. Right. Every one of us has one or two or three or four lucky moments that we just couldn't predict they were going to happen. How did I know I was going to be in a class with Steve Morse? Right. How did I know that the Dregs were going to be playing in a little club for $100, that someone who could change our life would stumble in for a beer and see some local music? That's how it happens.
Well, I mean, you could walk into the room with Steve, and like you said, preparation meets opportunity. You know, you walk in the room with Steve. Obviously, you were still shedding drums heavily, even though you were a piano major, because you wouldn't have been able to play Peaches and Regalia and all the Mahavishnu tunes if you weren't. So
yes.
I think that's the thing that's like the common thread, at least of the guys and girls that I've spoken to. You know, like that there's failure. There's always failure. And if the failure tests you, and if you cave with the first couple of failures, you know, everyone is confronted with those. They make you question yourself. You know, I didn't know the story of you knocking on the doors in New York. There's Neil Peart told the story of when he went to England to find fame and fortune as a rock drummer, and he knocked on all the management doors to drop off his demo. And then one woman, everyone slammed the door in his face, and one woman was like, "Well, you're very brave," you know. And then he went back to New York, a failure, to Toronto, a failure. And a couple of weeks later, it's like, there's these two guys, Geddy and Alex, that need a new drummer. You want to go down and jam with them? You know, so he came back a failure. And then it seems like that's, you know, Lib DeVito, who we had on last week, actually, same thing with his story, you know. And by the way, Dom Famularo and I are interviewing Billy Cobham on Friday on this very program. So
send him my regards.
I sure will.
One of my biggest influences. And in fact, Billy was the original drummer in Jazz is Dead. And so, right, it was Jazz is Dead. Alfonso Johnson on bass, right, and T. Lavitz from the Dregs on keyboards, and Jimmy Herring on guitar. So when Billy left the band, and T called me and said, "Hey Rod, how would you like to, you know, fill Billy's shoes in Jazz is Dead?" Along with, like, you'd be sharing the drum position with Jeff Sipe. I don't know if you know the name. He is a monstrous jazz player. So, like, you'll do a leg, and then Jeff Sipe will do a leg, and then maybe somewhere down the line we'll double drum it like the Dead, which we did. But so the thought first of filling Billy Cobham's shoes, like, I was quaking in my boots. Wow. And then on top of that, I remember as a college student in Miami going to what was the hall called in Miami where the Philharmonic played, the Miami Symphony, to see Weather Report, and there was Alfonso Johnson playing bass. And then right when I got out of college and moved up to Augusta, Georgia, drove to Atlanta to see the Billy Cobham George Duke Band, and there was Alfonso Johnson playing bass, right? And being in the audience saying, what would it be like to ever have the opportunity to play with a bass player like Alfonso Johnson? And so I remember flying from New York to San Diego to play my first Jazz is Dead gig, knowing that I'm the first guy playing since Billy Cobham was the drummer, and Alfonso Johnson is going to be staring me down on the bass. I was freaking out. Plus, what we were talking about before about jam band music, when I would say, so T, so, I'm learning the head of the song, whatever, Dark Star, or I mean, I love the Grateful Dead, right? Like, and so then what happens after that? And he would say, we'll see. You make it up as you go. I'm like, what do you mean you make it up as you go along? Like in the Dregs, even though we're a musician band, it's controlled. We know, at least the drumming, I know, say 75% of the time, exactly what I'm doing, with slight variation. And I had already done Winger at this point. It's like with Winger, you're working out a lot of the things. So, oh my goodness. It was one of the scariest moments for me. Scary in a good way, because it's good to be put, in the boilerplate and have to kind of prove yourself or show what you're made of. The same thing happened doing the Burning for Buddy recording with Neil. You mentioned Neil. Terrifying, literally terrifying.
Are you one of those guys that so you go in there and, Cobham was the last drummer, once you started to play, did it go away, or were you thinking about it a little during that performance?
No, it went away really fast.
Okay.
Because I don't play anything really like Billy. At least in the beginning, I mean, I copped all his licks back then, but Billy has a very rudimental drumming background. I don't.
Oh.
So he's got these phenomenal, rudimental chops. I come from a different background. I studied, big band with Howie Mann, local teacher in Hicksville, New York. Yeah. And so I took a somewhat different approach to the music than when I was listening to how Billy was approaching it. Yeah. It was amazing what he did. But the whole experience turned out to be so much fun. And I have to say, one of the most rewarding performing experiences of my life, of the hundreds of shows and recordings that we did. And in fact, I don't know, I've done maybe 60 albums in my career. If someone said, if there was one recording, if someone wanted to check you out and to kind of get the essence of what you're all about, which one would it be? I would say Jazz is Dead, Grateful Jazz. And it's an album that was recorded before T. Lavitz passed away, and it didn't come out for probably 10 years after we recorded it. And it's not on like a label. You'd have to search it out, but Grateful Jazz by Jazz is Dead. It's like my proudest drumming.
That's great to know. All right. Well, after these sessions, I always share links and information in the comments. And thanks everybody for watching. We have people from all over the world here typing in the nicest things. Our friend Carlos Guzman said the name of that theater was Olympia Theater, later to be named Gusman Hall.
Gusman Hall. Oh, thank you.
And Steve Rucker's watching too. So I know Steve's
Steve.
been really, yeah. Many other friends from all over the world. So Rod, we're going to have a part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 to get to everything we want to talk about. So let's just, if we can, quickly touch on a few things in the time we have left. Just give us a little quick overview of your books. I know I have an older version of it here, but Drum Set Musician and Drum Set Warm-Ups.
Sure.
And first, maybe how some teachers that are part of SEN can use them if they don't use them already.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so that's the original cover of Drum Set Warm-Ups. As you can tell, I'm a child of the 60s. And so when the design was happening, I had some input. The current cover looks a little bit more generic. So it looks like your average drum book.
Right.
So what happened was this. What do most of us do when we practice? Well, I typically sit down at my drum pad and I maybe do some things out of stick control, or I go through some rudiments. I love to read concert snare pieces, really challenging things like the Anthony Cerrone Portraits in Rhythm book. Mm-hmm. I love really complex rhythms. So I'm going back 30-something years. Typical day, I sit down to practice. My drum set is 1 foot away from me. I'm sitting at the pad. I'm doing my rudiments. I look at the pad, I look at the drum set, I look at the pad, I look at the drum set, and I say, why am I doing this? I don't play a drum pad, I play the drum set. What do other instrumentalists do when they warm up and play their scales and arpeggios? Do they warm up on something other than their instrument? Does a saxophonist warm up on a kazoo? Does a piano player warm up, on a tabletop? Does a guitarist warm up on a 2x4, and then say, okay, now I'm warmed up. Now I can play my instrument. No, they warm up on their instrument. And so as important as I think the drum pad is, because that's where the basic mechanics of holding the sticks and getting proper technique begins, we don't play the drum set like this. We play the drum set like that. And we also have our legs that are doing any number of things. And so I had this major epiphany in the moment. It's so wonderful when you think you're hitting on something for the first time in the world. Like, oh my God, has no one else ever thought of this? I'm going to write the world's first drum set warm-up book that consists of the drum set equivalents of scales and arpeggios that every other instrumentalist does on their instrument. And so it's not a book that's filled with cool beats and fills. That's what a lot of drum books are all about. This book is about scales and arpeggios, so patterns of motion that get your limbs moving in any direction or any and every direction conceivable, whether it's side to side, up and down, crisscrossing the drum set, going very long distances with one limb, all with the goal of waking up every single little muscle throughout your body, so that when you close the book after a few minutes of doing the scales and arpeggios, little by little, you're going to feel this thing happening with your body to where everything is getting easier and easier to do, because you're not just sitting down at your drums. And I'm guilty of this too. What do? I feel like playing my drums. I sit down at my drums and I go to my favorite stuff, right? Okay, so I'll sit down at the drums and go, is that warming up? Well, for some people it's warming up, but I think warming up is more like not that's not warming up. That's playing your instrument. But that was the whole moment that happened for me. And it happened probably 10 years into having scribbled down bizarre patterns that I would make up when something was bothering me about my drumming. So one day I'm playing my drums, I play left-handed, and I say, my right side is so pathetic compared to my left. I'm putting down my drumstick. I'm going to just go around my drum set with my weak hand. Okay. Now I'm going to go every other drum, so I'm making the distance farther. Now I'm going to go the opposite direction. Now I'm going to just go side to side. Maybe go floor, snare, hi-hat, snare, floor, thing. Right. Let me be dynamic with it. Oh, right. I forgot. Dynamics is something that
dynamics. What?
Let me travel a huge distance. The bell of the ride, the hi-hat, my low floor tom, my high rack. And I'd feel all this stress in here, And then another time when I'd sit down, I'd say, I don't know, something between the coordination between, my hands and feet. Okay, how about going back and forth, but then boom, and over the course of these 10 years, I had all these scraps of paper with these somewhat weird patterns of motion that had been collected, and I found that they were really helping me, not just with technique, but with building like the confidence and making it easier to negotiate my way around the drum set with all kinds of patterns. And so then 10 years into it, there was that moment of sitting at the drum pad and going, oh my God. So that's how drum set warm-ups came about. The other book that you're holding up, The Drum Set Musician, Years ago, Rick Mattingly, who's a friend of mine, he was the editor of Modern Drummer magazine. He and I talked for the longest time about writing a drum book together. And since he was so familiar with the hundreds and the thousands of drum books that are on the market, he said, Rod, what I think is missing is like an introduction, intermediate drum set book that teaches the drum set from a musical perspective. Not, here's a cool beat, here's a cool feel, here's a this or that. Let's start at the beginning and teach someone when they learn a groove, a simple groove, now there should be a play-along piece of music that the person can play this groove along with. But that'll also get us into a discussion of song forms. And so you start discussing the blues, the 12-bar blues form, which happens in 3-4 measure phrases. And then we can talk about, well, the way you designate the beginning of a phrase is perhaps by crashing a cymbal. That lets you know, oh, great, now we're at the 4 chord in measure 5. And then it just progresses very logically from one concept to the next. And then the pieces of music get more and more interesting. I wrote all the music, that's part of it. And so there's now a second edition to the book that came out about 2 years ago. So it's still purple, but it says second edition. And there are about, 18 play along tracks. And it really covers so much from day one. Mm-hmm. And in terms of being an educator and someone who grew up in a family where both my parents were college teachers, when it comes to teaching a musical instrument, I know that maybe not so much today, but when I first started, there seemed to be a mentality among drum set teachers when the kid or whoever the person is walks in for the first lesson, the teacher would say, you see that drum set over there? Don't even think about it. You park yourself at this drum pad and it's time to start learning how to play a paradiddle, and a double stroke, and kind of like, why would you subject anyone to that kind of torture? When someone comes in for a drum lesson, they don't care about rudiments. They don't care about reading. They just want to be able to play along with their favorite song. And so that's my heartfelt belief in terms of how you should teach any musical instrument, whether it's drums or whatever. Someone comes in, you see that drum pad? We're not dealing with it right now. Yeah. Sit down at the drums, okay? And let's see if in our time together, in our first sitting, by the time you leave here, we can get you playing what I call tried and true kick snare pattern number 1, which is the bass drum on 1, the snare on 2, the bass drum on 3, the snare on 4, with either, hitting the hi-hat on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1 and 2. We'll get to 1 and 2 and 3. And if you can get somebody coordinated doing that motion by the time they leave, I think the fire has been lit. And then you sneak in the other things as you're going along, but let it be like fun from the get-go. There should never be any kind of negativity associated with a musical instrument.
That's a wonderful philosophy to have, and it's something we always talk about with all the teachers I'm friendly with, and also everybody in SEN. And especially now, it's funny, the drum teacher now also, sometimes the new student who's young doesn't have a favorite song because they're not growing up with the same exposure to music that I did or that you did. So we also not only have to almost say, hey, check this out, and give them the inspiration of the music as well. They obviously still have something, people have something inside them that says, hey, I want to play this instrument, which is, they have it in there, but it's, as teachers, you don't want to stifle it by giving them boring things. And, a beginner doesn't know why they have to practice stick control every day. So maybe you shouldn't start there. I think we're on the same page there, but okay. And quickly, can you talk about, so with all this knowledge, you've also designed, been teaching at Berklee for many years, and you've designed an online rock course that you did of your own design that people can take, correct?
Yeah. So it's called Rock Drums, about 10 years ago or 11 years ago, the online division contacted me. And I taught 20 years at Berklee College of Music. I retired from that 2 years ago, but I continue to teach this online rock drums course. They asked me to create what would be, I guess, the world's first 3-credit college course in rock drumming. Now, you don't have to take it for the college credits. You can also just, I don't know what the word is when you take a course just for the sake of taking it.
I think it's auditing, right?
Auditing, yes. Thank you very much. So I'm an educator. I should know that.
That's your page, I think, on the site, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so I spent an entire summer giving many hours of thought to and developing what would be the 12-week curriculum. And I thought the best way to teach a course on rock drumming would be initially to go back to the very beginning to try to get to the core and the heart and soul of what makes rock music and rock drums tick. What is it? What are the commonalities and similarities, and what are the things going on in rock drumming that we can find in literally thousands and tens of thousands of songs throughout the 60 some odd year history of rock and roll? So I thought that was a great place to begin. And I came up with what I call the 7 tried and true kick snare patterns. And it's an arbitrary number. It could have been 5, it could have been 11. But as I listened to nearly 10,000 one-minute clips on iTunes of hundreds and hundreds of rock artists, I kept hearing similarities, right? Oh, there's that kick snare pattern again. And I keep going back to Back in Black because that song uses kick snare pattern number 1.
Right.
The thing that that plays a huge part into how that kick and snare pattern feel is the way one plays the ride pattern. And so with ride patterns, you can play a quarter note ride pattern, an eighth note ride pattern. You can play all the eighth notes evenly. You can accent the quarter note. You can slosh the hi-hat. You have unlimited surfaces that you could ride on. You can crack rim shots. You could play regular. You could play cross stick. And so what every drummer needs to know is that each one of us has the one way that we play, but there are unlimited numbers of ways that we can slightly alter that exact pattern that we're playing and sound a little bit differently. So if any of us find ourselves in a situation where, let's say, we're playing that pattern, and if we're a drummer for hire and the person who's in charge said, the groove's good, but like there's something not right with it, don't get all huffy, puffy or defensive. Understand that there's something that you can maybe slightly alter that's going to give the person what they want. They're not looking for some dramatic kind of change. And so through those 20 years of teaching at Berklee, I would do a lot of experiments with students where they didn't know I was experimenting with them. And I would have them do something. And then I would maybe ask them, your ride pattern, do you think you're accenting every eighth note, or do you think you're playing every note evenly? And half the time they'd get it wrong. And that gets to another subject of we need to think in terms of occasionally doing a little bit of self-analysis of how we play. Record yourself, video yourself, and watch yourself. And you're going to find out things about yourself that you didn't necessarily think were so.
Right. That's great. There's some nice comments coming in about people who took the course.
Yeah. And just to finish, so that's how the course begins. And by the time we go through the 12 weeks, we get into deeper topics of ghost strokes and, double bass. You have to cover double bass, even though not all genres of rock have it in it. It has to be there. Odd time, the influence of Latin rhythms in rock. I go through the 6 iconic drummers of the 60s with Ringo, Mitch Mitchell, Ginger Baker, John Bonham, Charlie Watts, and Keith Moon, and signature drum grooves, signature drum beats, drum fills around the drum set that most drummers are not aware of a drum fill. Maybe I came up with the title of the backbeat fill. In the 80s, when the drum machine took over and drummers were being replaced by guitarists and keyboard players programming drums, those people did not realize the limitations of playing the drums. So when a drummer goes do 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 ba ba, you can't still have the groove going, you know. Ba, do,
Oh,
do,
yeah.
do, 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 right? But I then had a moment where I said, wait a second, you can go do 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 ba do 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 ba do 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 ba do 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 ba, and so like, what a great concept, the backbeat fill.
Right.
So so that's one of like hundreds of concepts and ideas and techniques that we get into this course. So it should have been two completely different packages, but it's all crammed into one 12-week course. And I teach it. I still teach it.
Oh.
And 1 hour a week is a like a meet and greet live class where wherever they are in the world, if they're available, it's like a hang, and it's so much fun. But the rest of the week, the student is left, on their own to kind of go through all of the material and answer the discussion question and submit the play along track that they choose for the week. All music that either I wrote or that I worked with one of my buddies in Winger, John Roth, guitarist, and like lots of original music. It's a really fun course that filled with so much information.
That's great. There's a great comment here from Jimmy Ross. Those weekly live classes were the experience of a lifetime for me.
Thank you, Jimmy.
And your colleague at fellow Sabian artist and Berklee College, Sergio Belote, is commenting as well. Triple major? I don't know what that is.
Hey, Sergio, miss you. I miss you, man, a lot.
So you're doing that online now?
Yes. Yeah, I've been doing it for the 10 years since it went live.
Okay, but
the beauty of online teaching, I don't need a drum set because it's just the 1 hour class. So I tour a lot when we don't have coronaviruses happening, and so I'm able to do this class, sitting in my hotel room,
right,
anywhere in the world as long as there's internet service.
That's great. So I have two more things. We're almost out of time, but I want to get to these two things because it's important. First thing is obviously this platform has been given to us and by Sabian. It keeps me able to get all this great information out to our friends and teachers and players. How long have you been with Sabian?
I've been with Sabian since 1989.
Wow. And designed a custom ride cymbal?
Yes, it's been such a wonderful experience. I've come to know so many people through the years. And when they approached me about doing a signature cymbal, I wanted a cymbal that could have not just two distinct sounds where you have the body of the cymbal and the bell. I wanted to figure out a way that we could maybe have a third sound in it. And so the way we came up with that was directly below the bell, unlathe or not lathe the first, say, 3 or 4 inches of the cymbal, and then lathe the outer part of it. So you get the beautiful lush sound with overtones on the outer part. And then in the middle of the cymbal, you get a harsher, more distinct, crisp tone that's not quite like a bell. And so, it's like, I think we call it the tri-top cymbal. So it's come in so handy for me. And I love when a gimmick actually is not just a gimmick, when a gimmick actually does what it says it's supposed to do.
Yeah. I was thinking that exact thing when you were talking about the ride. When I think about your books, your 2 books, and think about what you just said about the ride, even some of the things you said about the course and about the band, I'm just so intrigued that your thought process. Like, I was having a consultation with a drummer this morning about writing a drum book, and I said, if there's a lot of good ideas, that's great, but you need a thesis. You need a central theme that's really the driving, theme of what you're trying to do. That's going to set it apart from everything else. Like, there's hundreds of ride cymbals out. There's hundreds of drum books out, and all of your you just seem to come up with like a concept for all these things that hasn't really been done, but yet is attractive to so many other people. And that's a real rare thing, which is cool. So that's just a comment I noticed.
That's awesome. The same thing happened when, the Vic Firth isolation headphones came about. Like, when my ears started ringing 24/7 and I had to figure out something to do, and someone said, hey, here's an orange pair of gun shop headphones to protect your ears, and I loved the way it sounded. And then I had to learn some music for an upcoming Winger record. So back then with the cassette and my Walkman, I put my little Walkman speakers upside down under the headphones. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to have the music blasting. I could turn it down to a comfortable level and hit the drums for hours. And then again, that epiphany moment of realization one day hitting me. Oh my, can you imagine if these big phones had speakers in them? Why wouldn't every drummer or every musician that, say, is in a recording studio, even a guitarist that has to be next to their stack of Marshalls playing, they don't want the Marshall to be in a closet, they want to be by them. So use an isolation headphone so you can be listening to the distorted sound of your Marshall amp at a quiet level. And the problem with the drum set is you can't sit in the control room while you play your drums from another room. You have to be sitting at your drums. And so these headphones, they've saved the hearing that I have left.
And everyone wears them now. Like, you know, you go into every day in my Broadway shows, like slap on the, if it's the Vic Firth ones, stay here, and I take these other ones with me. But that concept, you know, which is great. So Robert, can you give us a little more than an hour? I got one more. Sure. I think maybe you could just talk about, I know that you're have decided to, you've accumulated a lot of great equipment and memorabilia that has a lot of great memories and is associated with a lot of the famous recordings and tours and things that you've done. And it's my understanding you decided to maybe part ways with some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a really interesting year in many ways. It's been trying, to say the least. I lost my dad in April, and his demise began way back in December. And it was, you know, one of these very slow, unfortunate falls from grace of what happens to people, you know, as they get older. I mean, my dad lived 97 years, was the most important man in my life. He and my mom never missed a concert that I've ever played. And in fact, there they were at the last Dixie Dregs reunion concert at the Paramount Theater in Huntington in 2018, right? They were at the first My Father's Place show in 1976. And every show since, right? So, so with losing my dad and some other, you know, like trying things that happen in life, I started kind of reevaluating everything and realizing that in my life I've accumulated so many things, and part of the cleansing, so I can move on with things, which, I mean, I'm still, you know, in perfect health, you know, let's knock wood. In addition to like going room to room, closet to closet, drawer to drawer, and go, come on, let's donate this to this organization and this to that organization. I started going through the 45 years of my music career of things I've accumulated from, you know, the plastic VIP backstage laminates of every tour I've been on, hundreds of them, all the one-of-a-kind Winger clothing that I had made, you know, during those years where, you know, the image and look of the band were so important, drum sets, awards that I don't have wall space, you know, and I'm saying this is not coming out right, but I'm saying, you know, I have my gold and platinum records, but there are other kinds of awards that I just don't have the space to put them in. I just don't feel the need any longer to hold on to every single thing that I have accumulated through this career. And I thought, hey, you know what? I wonder if there might be folks around the world that are either collectors or fans and might like to have one or more of these things. I had 100 posters, whether they were, you know, Sabian or Premier or Vic Firth or concert posters. So I've signed, you know, hundreds of things. Some things are framed, others are just the posters rolled up. There are drum sets, snare drums, cymbals from a prior cymbal company. I know I'm leaving things out, but with that, even though like I watched my friend Ed Tucker, who has a vintage drum business, and he's the person who is taking care of all these things. I watched him drive away from here 2 weeks ago in a Dodge Ram where he had no vision out the back, pulling a 12-foot trailer that was filled to the brim with things. And I still look around,
Cool.
I'll just walk around for a sec. My room, and so here on the shelving are all kinds of things that I can't get rid of. And my tie-dyed drum set and a Roland electronic kit and what are we doing here? What is this from? A Winger first album gold record and the second album platinum, and as you can tell, I'm still like a teenager. I'm into purple, red, and black.
I love it.
And my 60s Fillmore East and West, rock posters. Let me just show you.
Oh, cool.
You got to see this one. This is so cool because it's Led Zeppelin in the middle, opening for Country Joe and the Fish.
Right? That's so funny.
Yeah. And then over here, here's the original artwork of the Rod Morgenstein project album. My friend is an amazing artist, and he airbrushed that. We got his Winger in Japan, Dixie Dregs in the Mud. For our album, Dregs of the Earth, we rented tuxedos and found this abandoned gas station after a rainstorm where we destroyed these tuxedos. You can kind of see everybody's in the filth.
That's great.
There's like a premiere poster from, I think, when Winger played Hershey Park Arena. But so, some of those posters that I have hanging, I had multiple copies of them. And so I just kind of said, why do I need 10 copies, of this premiere poster? I have one. Do I need 10 of them?
Right.
Or certain, test pressings of Dixie Dregs or Winger records, and a couple of them signed by every member of the band, number 33 of 50. I'll keep number 5 of 50. I have that one. So why do I need number 33? I'm sure there's, a Dregs fan or a Winger fan or whatever, or a collector that might enjoy having these things. So it makes me feel good. I enjoyed going through everything, and actually did have some, moments of maybe, a little tear welling up inside, because, things bring back memories, or certain things. Like I'll look at certain things in my house and it brings back, my wife, Michelle, who passed away 14 years ago. And I'll get all kind of choked up. But it's the same thing with career things. I look at something and go, oh, you remember that? Remember that's when I met Robert Plant, or one of my idols. But still, I have no second thoughts or misgivings about a lot of this stuff being gone from me. And a lot of it is already sold, fortunately, which is nice. So
is it okay? I was going to share in the comments the information about where people, if they want to look, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So I'll put this up for you guys. It'll be in the comments if you want to investigate these items that Rod has had decided to let you guys enjoy rather than keep them. You can only keep so much stuff, after a lifetime of.
Hey, how much, Joe? How much stuff do you have? Right, like you got some stuff, right? Looking, I actually had to. No, my cat. I can't. There's too many skeletons in that closet. They'll all fall out. Even I had to. It's like, how many drum sets do I need, and more importantly, how many drum sets can I have before my wife kicks me out of the house? Like different. But yeah, it's great that you're not just the big stuff too, like the like items that somebody might love to hang up that can remember a concert or somewhere someone met you at a show and they got your autograph and they can have something to remember it by now. Totally.
So, well, Rod, I've kept you for well over an hour, but I thank you for giving us this time. I'm going to definitely have to have you back on because we could just go for many more hours, and it's just always such a pleasure to see and speak with you.
Likewise. I had so much fun doing this, and I had fun hanging yesterday when we were sort of talking about getting it together.
I know. So thank you guys for watching. Rod and I were having this great conversation, and I was like, stop. This is so good. Like, we've known each other a while, so we're catching up, but also talking about things that giving me ideas to talk about. But it was just great. I'm really happy that we got to catch up. And I have to say, there was a time where I was playing in I think it was a Deep Purple tribute band with some really good players, Greg Smith and Angus Clark, Jimmy Coons, and you came to hear us play on Long Island. And the feeling that you had sitting in Cobham shoes, I saw you walk in, and we had of course met many times before then, but it was like, man, I have to play in front of Rod tonight. Oh boy, this is going to be rough. But I tried to hold it together. That was just great that you came. I was so happy.
And you killed it.
Oh,
by the way.
Thank you. That means the world to me. Well, thanks, Rod. I really appreciate it. And thank all you guys for listening. If you missed any of this, because we went pretty long, go back. All these interviews are now living on YouTube. They're all on Facebook. And rejoin us. Dom will be on Thursday with his Teacher Spotlight. And then Dom and I will be back Friday at 2 with the great Billy Cobham, which I'm really looking forward to having another legend on with us today. I got the greatest gig in the world. So I'm super happy about that. Rod, thank you so much again. Thank you to Sabian Education Network, and thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, thanks
Bye-bye.
everybody. See you later.
Bye-bye.